welcome to week 2. So you'll have seen from module 1 that we go through that historical evolution of thinking around the information society, and you'll also notice that various people use various terms to describe the same core concept. And what is that concept? Well, essentially, we might identify 2 or 3 key themes to sum up what people are talking about in terms of the information society. And what we see, number 1 is a shift in those nations, those societies where there are advanced industrialized economies. We're seeing a shift away from manufacturing towards a variety of service industries, and I'll elaborate on how we might identify that kind of shift in an Australian context. But that's interesting because service industries are commonly knowledge intensive. They require the adding of value in order to deliver services. So we can see that trend occurring in Australia, and I'll point to some specific examples in a moment. A second theme that you might pick out from that historical evolution, as well as from what's happening in Australia or wherever you are, for instance. So if you're not in Australia, you're located somewhere else, and you want to set your first assignment in that location, then that's fine. By the way, you can do that. I'll be talking specifically about Australia because that's where the majority of the cohort are. But that second theme that we might identify is an intensification of the use of information in our work. Okay, an intensification of the use of information. And why is that? Well, that's in order to go through that value-adding process that services require. If somebody's going to buy in a service, it needs to add something to what they might do anyway. Okay. And what's a third theme? A third theme is an emphasis on infrastructure that supports the use of information and knowledge for competitive economic advantage and for social benefit. Have we seen any discussion around infrastructure in Australia, for instance, in recent years? Of course, we have the National Broadband Network has been a significant political football through at least two electoral cycles now. It's developing in some shape or form. The shape that it takes is changing as we speak, given the change from Labour to Liberal governments and different focus on that infrastructure agenda according to each government's priorities. But the National Broadband Network has been a really significant aspect of political debate over recent years in Australia, and that's because it's envisaged that such a network, such infrastructure investment would provide competitive economic advantage. It would allow Australia to develop a range of services that, again, assist in that transfer, that shift from advanced manufacturing through to added value service as a fundamental strand of a diversified economy. Now, at this point, I'll mention that what I'm going to do is provide a transcript for this discussion. Alongside it'll be down here, embedded as a link beneath the video once I plug this into the Interact site. And that transcript will incorporate a range of readings that I'll allow you to expand on what we're talking about today. Okay. So that means that those readings need to inform your first assignment. This whole discussion is informing your first assignment. I'm giving you a really good set of resources that will provide a core to your first assignment. So work with them, use them as a platform on which to build. And of course, this is postgrad study. A big aspect of the marking criteria are around your own independent research journey. So we'll be looking for evidence of that journey as part of the process of assessment. But these readings will extend your thinking and provide a core structure on which you can build. Okay. So I talked a lot about that shift from manufacturing to service industries. And a big factor here is that a number of nations are highly competitive in terms of the kind of workforce that they can offer. A workforce that's well educated, that can use, for example, English in an international marketplace, and has lower wage costs. And that's a really significant factor. Lower wage costs. That allows, or that perhaps forces or encourages transnational corporations to look overseas in terms of where they locate their manufacturing operations. And we've seen this really recently in Australia. So Holden, Toyota, car manufacturing is essentially gone from the Australian economy. And it's not just car manufacturing itself, because that process has a knock-on effect on the manufacturing industry. There are loads of suppliers that support car manufacturing. So it's about that kind of shift. What's going to replace car manufacturing? What's going to replace or diversify Australia's economy away from the downturn in the mining industry, another significant strand of Australia's economy? And again, I'm pushing this because the suggestion is that knowledge-intensive industry is going to be the diversifier in terms of replacing these manufacturing and resource-intensive economic strands. So if you look at how Melbourne brands itself, Melbourne, the city of Melbourne, Victoria doesn't have the same kind of mining investment as other states, and so in some ways it lags behind on the kind of boom, the mining boom that Australia's seen over the last 10 years. But if you look at how Melbourne brands itself, it brands itself as a knowledge-intensive city, a city that supports a creative economy, and that's very much its hope that that kind of economic development will support the development of Melbourne itself. Okay, so if you look at the transcript at this point, you'll see that there are a series of readings that extend this discussion around diversifying the economy, knowledge-intensive industries, the creative economy. I'd like you to follow up on those, because if we start talking about the digital economy, we need to think, okay, so loads of people are buying stuff online. That's awesome. I do it all the time. But where am I buying from? Am I buying from Australian businesses, or am I buying from overseas? Where's the capital flow? Does it flow back into Australia, or does it just flow across the internet to Europe, the US, China, perhaps? If we think about the kind of market for a digital economy that is evolving in China. We're talking about millions and millions of people. Okay, that's a big market. Where does Australia sit in relation to that? Okay, so this is where you need to delve into the transcript. Okay, are we using information and communications technologies more intensively? Well, I would suggest that we are. Anecdotally, if you have a think about it, you might, come to your own conclusion there. But given that you're probably watching this digital video that I've recorded on a laptop, and you're perhaps watching on a laptop or an iPad, that gives us some sense of what's happening here. But beyond, my opinion, your opinion, our respective perspectives, let's have a look at some evidence. And this is where you need to go to the transcript and look at some of the data from the Australian Bureau of Statistics, the Australian Communications and Media Authority, and I've incorporated data in the transcript that you can follow up on. I'd like you to have a look at that and come to some sort of evidence-based conclusion, because that's what we want to see. That's what we'll be looking for in your first assignment. You need to go beyond personal opinion. We need to see more than just Australia is a knowledge economy and information society because I use my mobile phone all the time. I need data. I need hard data beyond you, beyond people what's happening across Australian society. Give me some hard evidence, please. Okay, it's in the transcript. It's there. It's ready and waiting for you. Okay, have we noticed any discussion around ICT infrastructure in Australia over the last few years? Well, I've already touched on that. There has been a huge political discussion around the National Broadband Network, to the extent that the Labour government, the Gillard-Rudd governments, were prepared to make the most significant investment of public money, public funds that we've seen for a long time. They were prepared to invest 43 billion into the National Broadband Network. Okay, again, I've embedded some links within the transcript so that you can have a look at what our expectations might be for what the National Broadband Network is going to do for the Australian economy. And I remember a few years back when this was being debated in Parliament, there was a lot of discussion about why do we want this massive public investment in internet infrastructure just so some 15-year-old in his bedroom can download more episodes of Game of Thrones. That's one way of looking at what the National Broadband Network can do, or what any kind of infrastructure development might do for Australia's digital economy. I think we need to get beyond what's happening now and think about what might happen if you build that kind of infrastructure. What becomes possible? That's the question to ask. What becomes possible? And I think that there's some advances in how Australia thinks about those kinds of possibilities now and again. I've provided a link through to some reading from the Institute for Broadband Enabled Society at the University of Melbourne, which does some interesting work. So, look, I think that's a lot to be going on with, but I also think it gives you a really good foundation for the first assignment. So if you start thinking along those lines and exploring some of that reading, and the readings are really digestible, they're really easy to get into. A number of them are in a very they're from a publication called The Conversation, so it's academic research but communicated in a fairly journalistic style, so they're easy to get into, but there's also some hard data there that you can draw on that really it's going to really back up your argument. Whatever argument you present, it's going to provide some real support. You've got some real, you've got an evidence base for the kind of conclusions that you draw, and that makes for a really solid argument. So if you can start following up on that material, then I think you'll find that you've got a really solid framework emerging for your first assignment.